Okay, good morning, everybody. Today is February 27, 2021. Today's guest is Justin Sly, KN4MQR, out of Florida. He is the Florida mapping representative for Parks on the Air, and he's also very well known, at least in the state of Florida, that he has activated very challenging references. Without further ado, Justin, welcome to the Long Island CW Club, and the stage is yours.
Well, thank you for having me. Let me see if I can share my screen here, and we'll get started. So can everybody see the presentation
Yes,
screen?
yes,
Perfect.
and just I forgot to say that. You can ask questions at any time, or you can use the chat, and any questions in the chat, I'll ask Justin at the end of his presentation. Thank you.
Again, thanks for having me. My name is Justin Sly, and as Dimitri mentioned, I am the mapping coordinator, mapping representative for the states of Florida, Alaska, which I'm soon to pass off, and New Hampshire. And so needless to say, I like to do a lot of research, which I'll share a little bit in this presentation. So I'm aware that a lot of you have already been exposed to Parks on the Air through other presentations, and it's usually the general what is Parks on the Air and how to do it. And so I've been asked to kind of share a little bit more on the challenging references and how I've activated them instead of the general class. So with that, I want to give you a little bit of a back history about myself and how I got into Parks on the Air, because I think that'll give you some context about why why I do what I do. So we'll start with my story, then we'll touch a little bit on the hard to reach, the technically challenging references, talk a little bit about gear and planning, and do some Q&A at the end. And you're welcome to stop and ask questions in the middle of the presentation. Feel free. So I know that most of you are familiar with Parks on the Air, but I'm going to hit a couple of key terms real quick just to make sure, because I'll be using them probably through the presentation. So Parks on the Air POTA, that's the program. There is a lot of on the air programs out there where you take your radio somewhere and make some contacts. And Parks on the Air is a great one. Reference is the place. So that's the park, the forest, the trail, whatever it may be. Activity or activation, that's the act of calling CQ from a reference. An activator is who's calling CQ. Hunter and chaser are who's responding. And then a park to park, which we always get really excited about. And that's a QSO between two operators from within the same or a different reference. So that's us talking to people who are doing what we love to do. So we enjoy it. So a little bit about myself to kick this off. So as you can tell by my call sign, I'm a fairly new ham. I've been looking at becoming licensed probably for 20 years. And here in 2018, I got my ticket. And like a lot of new hams, I went out and got myself a 5-watt QRP radio to start with and to tinker with. And I live downtown Orlando. Excuse me. It's a very noisy environment. I live right across the street from a diner. So I spent most of 2018 listening to the appliances inside that diner, my neighbor's dishwasher, etc. And what I found was I spent a lot of time with nets. I found them to be the most accommodating to reaching out and connecting with me on QRP, but I spent a lot of time waiting and listening. And although that's good for learning the lingo and how to operate, it did not give me enough QSOs to really test antenna configurations and learn. I'm a very visual, hands-on learner, and so I have to do to learn. And so I needed a way to increase the number of contacts and decrease the amount of time. So, I would say I got a little discouraged with HF. I put it on the shelf, and then I spent some time towards the end of 2018 putting in and doing an install in my truck. And this picture is a funny story, this picture, and I'll explain in a second. But I took the back seat out of my truck, and I was gonna do an install and really focus on the local UHF VHF repeaters. About the same time, we had a family camping trip. And so I set up, got all the equipment, the tent and everything all piled into the truck. And I just picked up a new radio. And I figured, you know what? I have heard over the last several months, Parks on the Air activators. And I noticed that some of them sounded like contesters. Some of it sounded like a rag chew. But the one thing they had in common is they all seemed very nice and willing to slow down, answer questions. It just seemed like a good group. So I figured I would give it a try. So I went up to Anastasia State Park near St. Augustine, Florida, Northeast Florida. And I set up my radio, and it wasn't within 10 to 15 minutes that I got a pile up. I'd never experienced a pile up. I got DX stations, and I knew immediately right then and there that this was for me. And so what I did, I went home, I looked up at the time that there were 251 places that I could do POTA in Florida. And I thought to myself, what better way to hone my operating skills, to learn how to set up antennas and configure them, and then really determine the durability of the products that I'm buying, than to go out to an unforgiving location, set up, operate, break down, and move on to the next. So I challenged myself in 2019 to try to do all 251 parks in the state of Florida in 1 year. And so, I mean, if I wasn't at work and if I wasn't with my family, I was out activating. And that picture, that back seat is funny because I never installed the seat. I went an entire year, every free spare moment activating, never finished my install, never put the back seat in the truck. And then that truck ended up getting totaled. Someone hit me on the interstate. So interesting story there. So let's fast forward a little bit. Through 2019, I learned a lot. I met a lot of very friendly people on Parks on the Air. Their Facebook group is very active. They have a Slack group as well, and just nice people. And in the process of sharing my research to get to these different locations, I ended up volunteering to be the mapping coordinator. And so it just was a no-brainer to share these locations and fine-tune the push pins and everything to make it easier for other activators. Another thing that I learned was along the way was some of these references were a little bit harder to get to than others, right? I mean, a lot of them were in parking lots. I could just pull right in. I would set my antenna up next to the vehicle, operate, and move on. I started to realize that some you couldn't get to in a vehicle. Some you needed a boat or a kayak. There's even one park in Florida that there's no land. It's completely underwater. So many of these were challenging. So let's dive into that a little bit. And so, you know, when I think about these hard to reach and technically challenging references, I like to put them in a category, a level of difficulty. So I'll share that with you first. So like a level 1 to me would be paved roads, restroom facilities. You know, there's probably power and water, maybe a commissary. It's the majority of the references in Florida really are easy to get to, very accommodating. You can pull in, park, and do your thing. I kind of categorize a level 2 as state forests, right? A lot of those have improved dirt roads. You can still drive a car in them. They probably don't have restrooms, or if they do, you might not want to use them. No full-time staff, not a lot of people, but still accessible. And then you start getting into the more difficult locations. So you might need 4-wheel drive, or there might not be vehicle access to the reference, right? So you might have to walk gear in. That may just be as easy as parking and then walking through a gate and operating right on the other side. Or it may include permits and coordination, right? You might have to call, make some phone calls, or purchase a permit. But that's kind of like level 3. And then level 4 is long hikes. We have some islands here, and that reference with no land, which I'll share a little bit later. So I like metrics, and so I kind of look at the state of Florida just as a case study. And in Florida, about 65% are very easy to get to. You're going to have people there. It's going to be easy to access. And then another 27% are your state forests, et cetera. They're easy to get to, and shouldn't have any issues. And then that remaining 7%, right? That's the interesting part of POTA, that they have so many different types of locations, and not one style of activating is going to work for all of them. And that's what I really like about POTA. So I'm going to move on and kind of share a couple of examples of these. So in the state of Florida, we have national wildlife refuges, and you may have seen this sign. I think this sign is used outside of Florida for national wildlife refuges as well. And so you might ask yourself, how do you access, or how do you operate at a park or a reference that's not open to the public? Well, I'm gonna first stop and pause for a disclaimer, right? I am not an administrator of POTA, and so I'm going to share my experiences, and your mileage may vary. Your experiences may be different than mine, but I'm not suggesting that you operate in this fashion, but I think that it comes down to using your head, and also being friendly and having good interpersonal skills when you're speaking to park rangers, etc. So one example for national wildlife refuges is many have parking lots that you can park in observation towers, but some of them truly are a fence line and you can't get on the other side. What I have found that in some cases the property line and the fence line are not the same thing, and you may find a little pull-off area or a gate cut in. And in this case, this is St. John's National Wildlife Refuge. And just like I would pull off the side of the road to make a cell phone call, I will pull off the side of the road in my truck and do a Parks on the Air activation, take 5 minutes, and knock out my 10 contacts and move on. In this case, there was a tiny little wedge. I was able to back the truck up, make some calls. I spent 5 or 10 minutes, and I moved on. Another example is asking, right, for access. So this was Hollow Paw State Forest in Central Florida, and it took me about 4 weeks of asking around until I found the right person that gave me the gate code and allowed me to get access to this old World War II landing strip they use for forestry for harvesting pine. Another example, just kind of adding extra steps to get to, is Escribano Point. That's up in the Panhandle. You have to drive through Eglin Air Force Base, and so because of that, you have to buy a permit to access DoD lands. And in the permit process, they thought it was funny because you have to watch several videos on identifying unexploded ordnances. So needless to say, I didn't do a lot of hiking when I was there. I got in, I activated, and I left. Another example is just of hard to get to locations. Dry Tortuga, for example. It's an island. It's 60 miles west of Key West, and you have to take a ferry boat or a seaplane out to it. And I love this park. This is a beautiful park in the middle of paradise. I knew that there was a permitting process for ham events, as it mentioned on their website. What I didn't realize, or what I was thinking in my mind, is that's contesters with 100-foot aerials and a canopy and a generator or whatever. And so I thought, hey, I'll probably go ahead and get a permit, but it probably isn't necessary. And then I found myself in Miami working over the weekend, and I thought, you know what, I'm just going to drive down there and do it. So I drove to Key West. I took a seaplane out, and it was pretty cold that day, so there really wasn't anyone swimming. There wasn't anybody. They were all in the fort walking around. And I kind of hiked out that piece at the top of the screen there, out the edge of the beach there, and set up. And I mean, I was probably about 60 or so QSOs in, 50, 60 QSOs in, probably had been there 20 minutes or whatnot. And it was basically me sitting on the beach with an antenna sticking out of my backpack and a piece of wire. I had one counterpoise just laid out on the beach. And the park ranger came up and did inform me that they're pretty strict about it. And so I would say in the state of Florida, really, this is the one you definitely need to do your research and plan, because They have some very strict rules for amateur radio, including, operating out of your backpack. So this is Dry Tortuga. I thought it was interesting that the pilot was wearing no shoes. Just it's another word that went down there in Key West. Another example of operating that required kind of a little bit of a long walk. So this is St. Lucie Inlet Preserve State Park. And on their website, they say it's accessible only by boat. But if you get on the beach a little bit further south, you can walk up. It's probably at about a mile. It's not too bad. And you can walk into the boundary lines of the reference. And so that's exactly what I did. This is a different beach activation, but this is exactly the same kind of setup. Just a vertical antenna on a tripod with some counterpoise, usually elevated depending on what I carry, and then operate and then pack it out. Other long hikes, Denali State Park up in Alaska, that is in my opinion far better than the national park. So if you visit Alaska, spend some time in the state park because the hikes are nice and quiet. They're beautiful, and it's not like the national park, which feels like standing in line at the airport. There's so many people. So the trick with Denali though is the road is on the western side of a mountain range, and so you're blocked to the east, right? And I wanted to get all of my favorite hunters on the east coast, and so we usually hiked 2,000-3,000 feet up to the top and operated from up there. I really enjoyed that. The views up there are beautiful. And in the middle of summer, in the middle of June or July, and my son, from Florida, getting to play in some snow during the summer, it was a fun experience. So hey, we're in Florida. Snow is fun. Another area requiring walking in, and this I kind of did as more of as a joke because I had been hearing a lot of people talking about the band conditions and how bad they were. So I walked into one of the references. I was able to find access via swamp, and I thought I could walk through and get to a dry patch of land, and I found that it just was going to be over my waders. And so I ended up just activating kind of really in the water. I just put the antenna in the ground, a small little 44-inch whip, and tossed the counterpoise in the water and operated. So it just, it always seems to work. And there's always hunters out there willing to dig you out of the noise. But so that's walking, right? And then sometimes I'll go with a bike. The Withlacoochee State Trail is a trail that goes on the western side of Fort Cooper State Park, and there's no road that goes to this location, but operating here is a twofer, right? I'm within 100 feet of the trail, and I'm in the state park. So each of my QSOs count as one. So this was a fun little trip. I just put the radio in the backpack and biked it out. And I have biked several times when there's trails or something that can get me to it whereas I couldn't drive. Egmont Key, this is a ferry boat, right? So another backpack trip. In this case, took a small 44-inch whip vertical, and this is an old World War, I think Spanish-American War era fort with some gun emplacements, and my son loved it because you could walk all over everything. So we set up on top, and it was a lot of fun. But this is more like a hike. We hiked through. And then I started to get to the references that you needed a boat, and I am not a nautical person. I'm not a boater, and I'm really even not a kayaker. But I figured, hey, I do enjoy the water, and maybe I'll just have to learn this along the way. So the first one was Hall Creek Preserve State Park, and it was one where you could drive to a county park and put in, and then you could access the state park only from the water, only accessible from the water. So I took a kayak out, and the first location was a bust. I had some bushes that were blocking; I couldn't get through. So I went all the way to the other one there. It's on the left side of the screen, and basically just pulled up. Once I was in the boundary lines, I pulled up to a log and and I set up my antenna. I use a counterpoise, kind of an S configuration. It's a 17-foot kayak, so I do 16 and a half feet down the front, down the back, and then I have like a ball mount with a vertical antenna, and my radio usually in a dry bag. I actually, it never fails. About half the time something goes wrong. And in this case, I was having some just unusual issues, and it was related to a little adapter to that you see there on the switch. It was a bad adapter, so I had to kind of rewire the radio, which this would not have worked if I was out on the ocean. And so it's good to test these things in advance. Another reference in Tampa Bay, just south of Egmont Key, is Passage Key. And so on the way to Passage Key, I actually tested my my dry bag out. I got about a mile across the bay, and this is a pretty deep bay. And towards the end, I thought I could get slick and I could pull all the way to the beach, but the waves were too much for my inexperienced kayaking skills, and I did end up rolling it with no problems. The dry bag, kept the radio and battery dry, and I finished my activation out there. In this video, and in hindsight, I probably should have just put stills in because the video may not translate very well over Zoom. But this is an example where I found access to a national wildlife refuge. I kind of plotted my course based on their property appraiser site just to see how long of a kayak trip it would be. And I really didn't know what to expect, but I went out and, and this goes back to the boundary line. So with national wildlife refuges that are islands, they're off limits to public. The area between the below the mean high tide mark is accessible. It's state owned, so you do have access to that. And so I kind of nudge myself in based on the tide and to get within the boundary lines. Using my phone to kind of see where I sit and then operate and move on. And so this is Caloosahatchee National Wildlife Refuge. And then I did mention there are some underwater parks. So San Pedro Underwater Archaeological Preserve State Park is a 1 mile diameter over a shipwreck, and it's about 2 miles from shore. You can go over to Indian Key and then come down about 1.5 miles into the Atlantic. And it's probably 20 foot deep at the most in that area, but still it's the ocean. And at first I was going to do a kayak trip, but I found myself down there with my family, and so we ended up renting a boat. I just tied off on the mooring buoys that were at the park there, set my antenna up on the bow, and went to activating. So that's kind of an example of the references. And I mentioned technically difficult references, and I like to say some are more challenging than others. And the more that I'm doing this, I'm finding that your urban environments, or when a park reference is located right next to a substation or something, the RFI factor to me is more challenging than getting to the locations. Like I know the kayak sounds difficult and the boat sounds difficult and hiking, but when I see videos online of people doing Washington, D.C. and walking out, and I can only imagine the nightmare of noise. So that to me is a technically difficult a location to activate. Or when I have to set up antenna configurations to kind of squeeze into a tiny space, those are sometimes difficult. Moving on to kind of gear and planning, and I'm looking at my presentation here, and bear with me. I had a couple more slides in there. Yep, I do. So when it comes to gear, I'll share it real briefly. I spent most of 2019 focused on verticals, and I know that people usually say, throw a wire up in the tree. Well, in Florida, most locations, that's a big no-no. Staking things in the ground, a big no-no. So to me, a vertical antenna is probably one of the easiest, simplest methods, and it might not give you the best performance, but in Florida with flat topography and the salt water, it usually works out just fine. So I'll take you through a couple of those It looks like we're about 25 minutes in. I'll take you through a couple of those antennas, talk about the battery and the radio, and then we'll move on. So one antenna, as you saw on the boat there, is the super antenna that I use. I like this. I got this specifically for the kayak trips with a 44-inch whip, and it just works. And I have used this with a wire. I've used this with a 17-foot whip. There's just a lot of different types of ways you can configure it. And I run these really hard. I've been told like a contester, and I have not been able to damage it due to heat, which has been an issue with other products. So this was a pretty good little kit. It's turning into my favorite antenna. The next is probably what I've used the most out of all the hundreds of activations, and that's the Wolf River coil. So I went with the smaller Silver Bullet Mini, which gets you into 75 meters. And I started with on the ground radials, and then I shortly thereafter started mounting it on a tripod and using elevated radials, usually with either I have a PVC pipe stand for the end of the radial, or I have, depending on where I'm at, I have electric fence post stakes. So my feed points at about 5.5 feet, and the end of my radials are usually at about 3 or 4 feet, and that really works well from my experience. Now I have melted some Wolf River coils. I run them hard, and it's hot here in Florida, and I have melted several. They're very good. They immediately ship you out a new one. But shortly after the second or third one, they sent me a prototype to their high temperature model, and I tried to melt it and couldn't. So it's a good product. The high temperature version. I forget the name that they use for it, but great products and great group of people to do business with. Another one I tried was the Buddy stick. It's the Buddy pole, that group. It's their vertical, and I really was excited when I saw this antenna because it was it seemed very well machined and everything. The literature looked good. Just looked like a real high quality product. What I found was, now, and I don't have an experience with the Buddy pole, but with the Buddy stick, I found that that the taps were difficult to work with. In that, I guess if you installed this and you used it at the same place all the time, your taps could be placed perfectly. But I mean, sometimes I have to set up right next to my vehicle or a building or something metal, and so I really have to spend the time to configure the antenna, and the taps were a bit difficult to manage. I've also tried the Chameleon, and this is a shameless plug for Julian. If you haven't watched his videos on YouTube, watch them because he talks about most of these antenna systems, especially this one. And I use this one a lot in Alaska, and I use it a lot in places that if it was raining outside and I wanted to stay in a tent, because you don't have to go outside to adjust a coil. Now you do need a tuner, but it's a pretty good antenna system, pretty rugged. And then the first vertical antenna I went with, which was this MFJ, and I probably activated 100 references with this until I tore it apart. It's pretty good for what it is, and the price is 17-foot whip. So you bypass the coil on 20, and then it's loaded for the lower bands, but it comes with some good set of radials and all the parts and pieces you need. I ended up fabricating my own, like a heavy duty stud mount and tripod and a configuration for my radials. Have them all wound up on fishing line. I think they're like 8-inch fishing line spools. So everything kind of holds together and works pretty good. But this was a pretty good kit. And then I do have a 60-foot mast that I like to experiment with. So in Alaska, I did a vertical dipole on 20, and I played with that for a while, and it worked pretty good, as well as a couple other dipoles, et cetera, from this mast. And I basically just mounted it to the trailer hitch, and my wife and I kind of traveled across the Kenai Peninsula and all through South Central Alaska, camped on the side of the road and operated. So a lot of fun. And then the radio, I know you saw the 8 watt, the QRP radio at the beginning, but the kind of the workhorse for me is the FT891. I just find it's a newer radio, good filters, a giant screen, so it's easy to read, and reasonably priced. Just a good radio. And I don't baby any of my equipment. I use it, and I'm not intentionally rough, but I'm not delicate with it because I want to see it break. If it breaks, I know I don't want to put it in my gear bag, and I have a whole box of broken parts, and sooner or later I'll put a little YouTube video together to show what I think works and doesn't work. But that's the radio. I like the antenna analyzer. Again, I'm a visual learner, so I like to see it visually. And then when it comes to batteries, I know batteries is a very opinionated conversation, but I go with the lithium iron phosphate. I have some homemade homebrew ones, like the one on the left there, and then some store-bought like your Bio Inno, the one on the right. And when you look at the type of activations that I do, if you're in a vehicle and if you're right next to a park bench and you already have a deep cycle lead acid battery, and you don't mind lugging it to and from the park bench, then that'll work. But when you start hiking, going more than a mile, actually, I think that was the first, I went like a quarter of a mile or something with a lead acid battery in a backpack. And I said, I'm done. And so I went and built the one on the left there. Great battery. And you also have to think about maintenance and safety. So, weight aside, these lithium iron phosphate batteries, you can charge them up and leave them sit for a while. They don't discharge very quickly. They don't require a lot of maintenance. You can run them pretty much dead, as I do. I run all these batteries hard until the radio quits, and sometimes run other things on it after that. Unlike a lead acid, where you have to kind of really pay attention to how low you're discharging. And then the safety side of things. I don't like the idea of battery acid and spills and things of that nature. And so these are, unlike lithium ion or like LiPo batteries, that lithium chemistry that you commonly used in remote control cars are extremely dangerous. They are extremely dangerous. This is a fairly safe chemistry. It's a great battery pack. A lot of people ask me which size battery should I get. So I run 100 watts most of the time. And I run a 144 watt hour battery. And I do that because it's the largest, I'll start with, I do that because I like to fly. And the TSA says that batteries over 100 watt hours can be carried on with airline approval. And most airlines have a policy, at least Delta and Southwest have a policy of from 100 to 160 watt hours, you can carry 2 batteries on board. You can't check it. You have to carry it on. In case it starts a fire, you can put the fire out versus it being in the baggage. But so 144 watt hour Bio Inno is the largest under that 160 max. So I fly with these all the time. I fly with 2 of them. You definitely get swabbed. And I never fly with the one on the left, as you could probably assume why. So that's kind of the equipment, and we're 30 minutes in. I kind of want to pause. I ran through these slides a lot faster than anticipated, so I want to open it up to questions. So with that, I'll stop and allow everyone to chime in.
Okay, great presentation. What I'm gonna do, Justin, I'm gonna start from the bottom up. We got like 2 or 3. At least the ones at the bottom, they're kind of ham radio related. So Michael AD0L, have you had any problems with the super antenna? And I guess he's having some issues getting response from the manufacturers.
That's a great point, right? When I look at Wolf River coil, you can call Gary and his partner there and get a response same day and get things shipped out. Super antenna. I've done some research and I somewhat agree with you. It is difficult. I have reached out to them and not gotten responses. And I'm also a little confused as far as where to reach out because it just never feels like there's a single web page that you go to for super antenna. So that's, I like the antenna, and so if you want to get with me after the fact and share a little bit about the problems that you're having with yours, I can share. I know that antenna is very touchy at tuning, so whereas the Wolf River and others, it's very deliberate. You have to go several clicks up or down, or turning it side to side. That super antenna, you really only need to press it a little bit to make a huge difference. But with that, like I said, if you want to reach out to me afterwards, I can walk you through it.
Okay. Well, suddenly I'm getting too many questions. Doug, W5DMD, first he said, thank you for all the activations and contacts. And the second question, actually the question that he had is, do you load your contacts into LOTW?
I do not, and this is where I probably need to start getting better. I do not. I paper log. I find this I can paper log a lot faster than I can log into a computer, and so I convert that. I have an application I wrote that converts it to the ADIF for POTA, and that's it. And so I haven't gotten into Logbook of the World.
Okay. He said, if so, do you make a new base location for each park you're in? I'm not sure what he means by new base, but
I know the question because that has been discussed. So
okay.
make a note. And were you Dimitri? Do you have the ability to save these questions as well with the people that ask? I think
Um,
it looks like a file. You can save it out. Yeah, save chat. I'll do that before the end, and I'll
okay.
reach back out because I believe I might have an answer for you of how that.
Okay. Then I can post that. Um, Rich K2 UPS, he's one of the founding members of the club, and actually the teacher on CW when you first came in. Have you ever had any encounters with venomous snakes or other nasty critters?
So one, yes, I have had I've had issues. First and foremost, it's Florida and the swamps. A lot of mosquitoes, which pales in comparison to Alaska, which is more mosquitoes up there than you can imagine. In Alaska, have had bears, black bears, in the area, but nothing really to be too concerned with. And then in Florida, as kayaking, I've had alligators on the shoreline. No encounters where they bump my kayak. I have had a manatee bump my kayak. I actually think they're kind of rude animals, but they will mess with you and come across snakes. But no real close encounters where I feel like I'm in trouble. The only time I felt I was in trouble was with a two-legged uh, creatures. I thought I was going to get robbed. I had somebody watching me for a long period of time in Jacksonville at a park in an urban environment. And his buddy came over and talked to him, and then his buddy went around behind, and it just started to feel very uncomfortable, and I got out of there pretty quick. So.
All right. Dean K3IWI, another park activator. Do you usually operate sideband or CW?
Sideband. I started this. I'm not a digital. I'm not a fan of digital. I just don't get as much enjoyment out of it. And I always started with the intent to learn CW. So I was sitting in on the beginning of this call. I thought, well, maybe this is the group I need to join because I'd like to do that as well.
Okay, I'll follow up on that either tomorrow or Monday. Toby from Germany, DL3TM. What kind of whip do you use on the super antenna?
What kind of whip?
Yeah.
The super, so whereas some of the other coils, it's a solid mass, so you can put whatever you want on top and it supports it pretty good. The super antenna slides over top of the bottom. So if you put something too heavy on the top, it will push the coil down, and your tuning will go out. So I use a 44-inch whip. I have a titanium one and a telescoping one, and that's what I use on the kayak or while hiking if I have to go a long distance. And then from time to time, I'll try it with a 17-foot whip if the wind isn't strong, and I use the little set screw that comes with it. But I'm a little concerned that even that much weight, will push it out.
Okay, Rich WB2GXM from New York. Will the Z100 Plus work well with the FT817, or is it better to use the Z817 tuner with the 817?
I have the so I let's see. I'll have to go back and look at the tuner that I use for that one because it's been a long time. I use the 100 plus on my FT891, and if I get over there, the one that everybody, I guess I'm not sharing my screen here. The one that everybody, pointed me to in the past was. Let's see here. I'd have to share my screen again. I don't have an answer for that question. I have the one that for the 817 and 818. I had the one from LDG that everyone had recommended, and I don't remember the number on that one. So sorry.
Okay, Wayne, November 3 Delta Romeo Victor. Do you always take an antenna analyzer with you? And well, do you have a manufacturer you prefer? I think there was one on the
I try to. Yeah. I try to. When I'm working in the truck, I have a Scorpion screwdriver, and I don't. I mean, sometimes I use an analyzer, but I usually tune by ear because it's very narrow, and you're able to get it close by ear. But with most of the time, I take the Zoom Rig Expert Zoom 55 Zoom, and that one I've taken on all the kayak trips. I've taken that with me just because I want to be able to troubleshoot if I'm out there. And but yes, I do take an antenna analyzer, and I think those Rig Experts they are a bit pricey, but they're a really good product, and they have a couple of new ones out. That came out earlier or might have came out a couple months ago.
Okay, Michael G0POT. Basically, all he says is that the LiFePO batteries are always nice to have, but he always adds a cell monitor just to make sure that the cells don't drop too low and damage the battery. Just a comment there. Terry from Florida, KN4UWE. On the large 70 feet temporary mast, do you attach a dipole to it, periodically taping it off as you raise it up? So basically, I'm guessing the question is when you put the dipole on the mast, how do you connect that as you raise it, or?
Yeah, so with that mast, and it gets there's a lot of weight once you get it up there. It's pretty heavy. So I've a couple configurations. The one that I was using a lot was the vertical dipole, and so I would start by connecting it directly with some electrical tape at the top, and then I kind of let it dangle as much as I can. I don't like to have it sandwiched, on the side of the fiberglass mast the whole way, but it dangles down till I get to the feed point. And then I make sure it's as tight as it can be, and I wrap that with tape in a way that I can get the tape easily off when I'm bringing it down. But most of my activations are pretty short, so I'm not really setting these things up to last for a long period of time. I'm setting it up for with that mast usually for a couple hours or less.
And the other thing that Justin does is, well, at least in my experience, he activates more than one park every time he's out. majority of the times. Um, okay, for the mask, the only thing I will say to you, Justin, you probably don't know this, that when you used it up in Alaska, you were my first contact for Parks on the Air for Alaska. So you gave me Alaska, I think, in the parks program
And
there to get the 50
and
states.
now I worked with a couple of local activators, our hams there, to identify some other references that were easier to get to. The original set in the system was, I mean, it would take a lifetime to go to all the places, and the majority of them you needed to take a plane to. And so we added a bunch of references that are actually, you could get to it from the road, the road system, as they say up there. And now you'll find the activators up there. There's several that have been just out all the time, really giving everybody a chance to mark Alaska off their POTA list. So really excited about that.
Okay, Jeremy, KD8ZZJ from Michigan. How are you attaching the antenna to your kayak?
So I use it's called a ram mount, but it's basically a mount, a ball mount, and then I fabricated an attachment plate with the 3/8 by 2024 thread adapter, and then so I'll usually have that in my dry bag. I have the ball on the kayak, so when I get to my location, I unravel it. I pull the ball joint adapter for my antenna, attach it to the ball joint, screw on the antenna, and then my radials, like I had mentioned before, I have one that goes down the front of the kayak and curves around, and then another one that goes around the back and curves around, kind of like an S configuration. And that sits outside on the deck, and then I just plug that in to the for the counterpoise. So that's the configuration of the antenna. And I do keep the antenna. I've started keeping it assembled and in a piece of PVC pipe now that I have attached to the side of the deck. I used to keep it just kind of in the cockpit, and that doesn't work well when I'm wearing the skirt if I'm in the ocean or somewhere where there's waves. So.
And for most of the attendees here, Justin has a YouTube channel. I don't want to call him a YouTuber because I'm not
I'm not.
sure. Okay, I'm not sure how often you upload YouTube videos, but some of the configurations, especially the kayak one, you can see it up there. Excuse me. Jimmy from Texas, WB5MAT. Do you ever operate QRP?
I do from time to time. I still operate QRP, usually with the FT818, you know, from time to time. Not often anymore. As I mentioned, once I started getting into marking these things off my list as fast as possible, I run 100 watts. I get in and I could be as short as 5 minutes. Typically, on average, it's 15 minutes or so, and then I'm in and I'm out to the next one. So that's.
So Justin, this is for me. At some point, you had activated every park that was in the database, the Parks on the Air database. Is that a correct statement?
No, I saw, and so that's an interesting story. And I challenged myself in 2019 to do all of them. And so I think I did, of the 251 in the system at the time, I did 233. And then I started to get to the ones that were just too difficult to get to within that year. And I also started as the mapping coordinator. I didn't mention this in the post there, but as part of that responsibility is adding parks. So as I got, you know, a dozen or so parks away from finishing, I added another 50 parks to the location, a lot of wildlife management areas, which fast forward and bring us to today. I'm 2 away from finishing. I have one I missed in the Panhandle, and then I have an island in Southwest Florida, and it's I think there's 302 parks total in the system now, and I'm reviewing a list of 250 additional candidates that I'm probably going to dump in before I finish. And it will basically include all of the water management recreation lands. And that means Florida would be pretty much finished. There'll be no other state or federal recreation lands that we could add to the system. So that would make us complete, and also turn my 1 year project into probably a 4 year project. So.
Okay, thank you. And Dean has a follow-up question. Can you talk a little bit about activating sites that might be just a historical building in a city location, sidewalk, set up or operate from inside your vehicle parked really close? I don't know
Yeah,
if you have any experience with that, but
yeah, there are a couple places in Florida that's common. I know up like in DC and everything. I watch Carrie and Jason and the team up there activating, and that blows my mind doing that in the city, especially DC. But in Florida, and I'm a real big stickler for the boundary line. So I look at property appraiser websites and I see, is this sidewalk in it, or is the road, or is there another area? And so in the Panhandle, there are a couple of locations where there's a parking space, but not all the parking spaces. So I think I sat one time for like 30, 40 minutes waiting for someone to leave to get the parking space I wanted, versus trying to go and set up in the front yard or on a bench somewhere and getting told to take a hike. So that's one example. And then I do use the backpack. I have used the backpack before as well, in Tampa, and basically kind of just sat on a park bench and slid the 44-inch whip up right next to me, and kind of tossed the counterpoise to the side and quietly just did my thing for 20 minutes, and no one bothered me. So yes, I have, and that's challenging.
okay. There are no other questions on the chat. So if anybody else has any questions, please unmute and ask directly to Justin.
Okay, Justin, when you were going through your slides and rating the different parks in the third level, you talked about all of the elements except the last one on that particular list, and I was curious as to if there was something you wanted to say about that we skipped.
Gate cut-ins, maybe, is that what it was?
I think the degree of difficulty, I guess that's how you
Yes,
rate them.
yes.
The one that was the lowest one or the highest one, it was the one the underwater shipwreck. I think that will be the hardest one in Florida at this point in time.
I'll be honest. I actually, if you can get access to a boat, it really wasn't too difficult. Although getting jostled around wasn't very much fun. And I don't want to get in the weeds here, but I would say the most challenging one is one that I have left to do, and that's because it's an overnight kayak trip in very shallow water. So I could try to rent a boat and maybe get in, but I would probably still need a kayak to get in. And that's one in Southwest Florida. That's probably the most difficult one. The underwater one I thought would be, and it probably would have been if I would have taken a kayak, but the boat wasn't a big deal. And you mentioned level 3, and I did not mention gate cut-in example. What I did at the beginning, when I talked about reference boundaries and St. Mark, I think it was either St. Mark's National Wildlife or St. John's, where there was a notch in the boundary with a fence line, where you could get in the public side of the fence, but be inside the legal property boundaries. I don't know
Yes,
if that.
gate cut in was the question. Thank you.
Yeah. And listen, that's a very sensitive thing. I don't suggest that you park in front of a gate and set up a table and antenna mast and sit for several hours. But like I said, I pull in with a truck, tune up, activate for 5 minutes, and then move on, just like I would if I'm making a phone call. And if anyone looks like they're approaching, I'll head out.
One question from me, Justin. Do you? I mean, sometimes, especially the Alaska parks, I know you were posting on the POTA side upcoming activations. Do you typically announce your your upcoming activations for Florida? If so, is it on the Facebook or
I
so?
do. So I try to on Facebook. Facebook won't immediately, like if you post on Facebook and say I'm at a park. Some people may see it immediately. Some people may see it in 5 minutes. Some people may not see it at all because Facebook, their algorithm, they'll post whatever content to you that they think is best fit. So it's not a great place for immediate communication. But I do usually post, hey, I'm going to these. Tomorrow I'm going to 7 parks. Here's my route, and then I'll give all the pertinent information, the grid, the county, in case I have any county or grid hunters. And then if it's an island, I actually go an extra step. I have a couple of hunters, Dave, Victor Echo 3, Lima Delta Tango, who's really big into the parks or the islands hunting. And if it's a new one, I make sure I send him an email and let him know in advance that I'm heading out at the time. When it comes to game day and I'm activating, I usually try to self spot if I have internet access, but I don't do a lot of I try not to do a lot of Facebook back and forth because of the delay in people seeing.
Okay,
And I
thank
would
you.
recommend letting people know that you're going somewhere because all you're doing is potentially increasing the number of hunters. That hunter that may decide to change their schedule. There are a couple people that as soon as I spot, it's a matter of seconds, and they're always the first one uh, to uh, to come across. So
Yeah, I try to do that because I'm very small station, so if I get in within the first few contacts, I avoid the pileup. Okay, thank you very much, Justin, for your wonderful presentation and spending Saturday morning with us. I do appreciate that. I know you're very busy and it took a while to get you in. So, for the rest of the attendees here, please unmute and give Justin a big round of applause.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And like Dimitri said, I'm not a YouTuber, but on Twitter and Instagram and Face or Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube, my call sign is my username. And so I have some videos of some of those trips on the kayak and configuration. So if I try it, my wife tells me take more pictures, so I try to dump those there. Take a look and feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.